Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Brightspace training session. We're in the Lunch and Learn sessions at the moment, and the format for Lunch and Learn, as you are probably aware, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays is an open drop-in where people bring all of their questions, etc., and they can get pretty wild in there, but they've been a lot of fun to be involved in. Tuesdays and Thursdays, we're a little bit more focused, and we generally look at a particular tool or kind of process within the system that there's more interest around. Today's session is looking at the rubric tool in Brightspace. So obviously that's going to have some connection to our assessment setup and marking processes. And I'm going to start in the system playing around with Brightspace rubrics in just a moment. I'm joined this afternoon by Kelly Boone from the project team, and Kel will be helping to field chat, comment, etc. In the chat pod. We do have a Q&A going as well. You're welcome to utilize that and drop questions in there. We will also grab a link to the attendance register in there as well somewhere and put that into the chat as well. If you could just pop your details into that at some point as well. Other than that, it's relatively informal in the Lunch and Learn sessions. So if you do have things that you want to ask as we're going through, as I said, put it into the chat. We'll stop periodically or unmute, etc., and ask things, and we will deal with them as they arise. So at that point, what I might do is actually get out of Teams. We don't want that popping up. We might kill Outlook off as well. That will help for me. All right, and let's play around with the rubric tool. So a lot of you may have been looking at rubrics within your master subject site in Brightspace rather than your session sites. And if that's the case, more power to you. Moving forward, I guess, as we get more comfortable with the system, it would be excellent if you have your rubrics sitting there attached to your assessments, etc., and ready to use session after session in the master subject site. Having said that, I know that now we are past the week -4 provisioning date, where individual session subject sites for session 60 were provisioned, and you're probably looking at some yourself underneath the session 2 2024 tab, and potentially you're working on assessments and content, etc., in your session subject sites. Also to be expected, obviously, with the first big rollout this session. I'm going to start from playing around with some rubrics inside my master subject site. And then we'll talk about how to move those across if you need to. Now, the rubric tool itself, we find underneath subject admin. Under assessment, we've got rubrics. This will open up our list of rubrics. So we'll get a table of every rubric that we've ever made. And it's interesting to note that against all of these, there's a whole bunch that are called untitled. That's interesting. Maybe I'll just clean that up. Get rid of those right now. We've got the description, if there is one against the rubric. It's not really all that valuable as students don't generally see the description. But then we have a type column, which will talk about either an analytic or a holistic rubric. Holistic being a single criterion rubric. Otherwise, you would never choose that type. Some of them are scored. In this case, all of the ones I have in this dashboard, which means that points are being tallied to give a total value for the rubric, and that will ultimately be converted into the task weighting, task value. And then we also have status, which is either going to be published, draft, or archived. Published means that it's available to be linked to an assessment task. If you haven't published a rubric, you're not going to be able to see it when you try and add it to one of your assessment tasks. So let's go through the process of actually creating a new rubric briefly. Clicking on new rubric here. First, it asks for a name. Sample rubric for training in this case. Then if we zoom in, I notice that the status is up here in the top right-hand corner. I can shift that to either archived or draft if I needed to. If you're ever at the point where you can't find a rubric, it's probably because it's been saved as a draft and you need to change that to published for it to be visible. Then we get into our types. And as I mentioned, the difference between holistic and analytic is simply how many rows of criterion you have. A holistic rubric only gives you one row. So if you're dealing with any more than one value or one criterion in your rubric, it needs to be an analytic rubric. And to be honest, if I ever wanted to get rid of more than the one criterion, etc., you could just delete those rows. So there really isn't a reason for you to select holistic rubrics. Then we have, apart from our criterion areas where we have a small amount of space really, there's kind of a character limit here. Most criterion, I would hope, are relatively succinct, but I have seen some whoppers where people have tried to paste large amounts of information underneath the criterion descriptor. The first column really does need to be relatively concise where possible. You'll notice that you have the ability to either copy that row if you wanted to copy your descriptor and down to the next criterion point, or delete it. We've got some handlebars to the left if we needed to move these up and down. And then we move across into our individual scales within a rubric. And by default in the rubric tool, it gives us 4. It also puts these horrible labels on them, levels 1, 2, 3, 4, which doesn't help us much when, by and large, we're either dealing with things like high distinction through to fail. And firstly, we've only got 4 columns here, so I'd need to add another one here on the right. If that was going to be fail, for example, and then we would need to relabel these other ones. I'm only just doing this in a brief version. I've managed to mix those up quite well. Credit and distinction, just as an example. We'll deal with these numbers in just a minute, but you can have as few or as many of these columns as you like. And then we get into the business of either populating from the ground up or copying and pasting scale descriptors into these areas. And you'll notice that when we actually click on those, we get access to the Brightspace editor, which means we can use the WYSIWYG or the editing tool with things like insert stuff. So we could embed other information externally into those individual rubric criterion cells if we needed to. You may not, but it's certainly a possibility. And over on the right-hand side, we've also got a number over here, which is the total when you're using a scored rubric for a particular row. Now, I'll stop there for a second as I can see we've got a question already. As we pass the week -4 provision, does that mean that any changes in the master site will not automatically be reflected in the subject site? That is exactly right. Once the provisioning happens at week -4, it's not going to be copied over again automatically. You would need to copy any changes in the master yourself across into the session site, or to log a job with DLT, for example, to help get that done. All right, now I want to move along to talking about this scoring option. We're looking at the moment by default at this option that says points. And what that tells us is these values that are up here at the top would be applied to every criterion, which if you were using a quantitative rubric is probably not much value to you because most people have different values against different criterion. To change that, we switch that from points to custom points. And that then allows us to change these values to whatever we want them to be. So you might be in a position where you're saying that the first criterion is actually worth 20. And the moment that I put a value here on the right-hand side, you'll see that Brightspace has a crack at automatically provisioning these values up front for us, even if that doesn't really match up to our understanding of what a distinction may be point-wise, or a credit or a pass or a fail, etc. So the most important thing to understand when you're using a scored rubric, there's one hard and fast rule, and that is that the first column, the HD, must always start with the maximum point value. When we use the rubric tool for marking assessments, we can certainly grade within a range. So just because I've selected HD doesn't mean the student has to be given 20. I can still adjust that mark up and down, give them 19 or 18 or 18.5 or 18.574, all of that's fine. We can grade within a range. But when we create the rubric, you must have the maximum value here in the HD column when you set it up. Otherwise, it won't tally the scores properly. Okay, so the HD value must be the maximum. The rest of them, you can make whatever you like. If you want the distinction column to be 16.758, whatever, you can do that's up to you. You can have it whatever value you like for the other columns, but the HD column must be the maximum. So working through those and putting your scores in place, etc., that you want against each of those scales, copying and pasting the actual scale descriptors would be a part of setting up each of these, and then putting in a value for each. So if I said that the next part was worth 20 as well, spreads those out. Maybe the third one was worth 10. At this point, I've got 3 criterion that add up to a total of 50 in this scored rubric. I can add more criterion rows if I wanted to. I also have the ability to provide initial feedback, which means it's going to appear in the rubric for every student. And I've seen people utilize this in various ways. Some of them, because when we go through marking, you can put in your commentary for each student against each criterion. But if you've got preset text that you want appearing for every student, or even for every marker to utilize, you can put that in here and it will appear inside each of those rubrics. So have a think about whether you want any pre-populated initial feedback available against each of these scale descriptors.
Excuse me.
Yep. Hi, Donna.
Hi. Where do you put the, because usually we have a section, a cell of the rubric with words in it. Mm-hmm. So where do we put them?
If you click, underneath the point value, you can copy and paste them in there.
Right. And we don't need to use those point values. We can.
Absolutely not. So I'm making a custom points rubric first to give kind of a quantitative rubric. And the difference between that and the type you're talking about, a qualitative rubric, is you would shift this to no score. Once we do that, you'll see that those number values disappear, and all you need to do is select which of the criterion scales you want the student to get. That's the difference between the two. Whether or not you're using no score, so a qualitative rubric, or a custom points rubric, which has those other values that we were discussing a minute ago. Yeah. All right. What I want to demonstrate with this, if I just push these out again, 20, 20, and 10 with 3 criterion, is that it's telling me how much the rubric is going to tally. If this added up to 100, like a lot of the nursing rubrics do, for example, or whatever score you like. Some people have created their rubrics so that they actually have the same value as the task weighting. That's fine as well. But when you mark within Brightspace in a quantitative rubric, it will convert this value into the task weighting if they are different. So if the task is only worth 10%, but the rubric's out of 50, it'll convert it to a value out of 10 automatically. Now, scrolling down within the rubric creator, there is an area here called overall score, which I find really confusing because our overall values, if I'm using a score, are tallied here. This other area, which sort of is gives you individual discretion to overrule everything else, to be honest, I find it quite confusing, and I think students would as well. So what I've been doing, in fact, is deleting each of these other blocks underneath. And I've just changed this to not applicable because it's just quite confusing, I've found. So I've changed the value here. It can't be 0, unfortunately, and I can't get rid of it altogether. It makes me leave 1. So I've just changed the title here to not applicable and left it as 1 or more. And then I just don't touch it. Underneath options at the bottom, It talks firstly about the visibility of the rubric to the students. Do we just want it visible to them from the beginning? That will mean it's also visible to them when they go to submit the assignment. It'll show them the rubric for the task. Do we want it to be hidden from them so they never see it? Do we want the actual feedback for the rubric to be included in their commentary when we're marking assignments? Or, and this option has been probably the most popular from what I've seen so far, do we just want to actually hide that until the feedback is published at the end, and then they'll get the rubric and the feedback? If you're using a scored rubric, quite often people don't want those numbers up here to be visible to the students. They want the students just thinking about the actual grade they got for the task, at which point you can actually hide the scores from the students. So they're not getting numbers in the rubric, they're just seeing which scale they've achieved. If you want that to happen, then you can check hide the scores from the students. Underneath, it gives you the option of providing a description for the rubric. It's not visible to students, so I'm not really sure if there's a value in providing extra information about the rubric for someone else's reference, maybe. And then lastly, it talks about these other tools, competencies and ePortfolio, etc. We don't have these tools turned on here. We don't have them available at Charles Sturt, so you can ignore that section as well. So what we've just done is create a 3-criterion quantitative rubric. I've finished configuring it, and now I'm going to hit close. It auto saves. There's no save button. And that will now sit within my rubric dashboard. So there it is at the bottom, and it is published, and I can then link to this rubric with any assessment task that I would like afterwards. Now, if I had created the rubric that Donna was mentioning before, so a qualitative rubric, so no scores, I'll do that now. I can either create it from scratch, or I can actually duplicate this rubric. So if I hit the drop down, I can now copy it. It now makes a copy of the first one, at which point I can change the title. And in this case, I might even, in the title, identify what type of rubric it is. And I'm going to switch it from being points to no score. And you'll notice that in saving this, the status up here is as a draft, which means I'm not going to be able to find it when I try and make an assessment. So I better shift that to published. And then I'll hit close. And now I will have the 2 rubrics. This one is at the top, and it's separating them between those that use points and those that don't. So we have a qualitative rubric there that I can access with an assessment, and I have a quantitative rubric sitting in my dashboard. If these are sitting in your master site, they will be copied across at week -4 into your session subject site available for you, but they'll just be waiting every session for you to attach them to assignments, basically.
Lockie?
Yep.
Just a question regarding the draft instead of published. When would you use draft instead of published?
Look, to be honest, I want them all to be published. I want them to be available to me and accessible. It's just that Brightspace, when you copy items, it sets them to draft for some reason. So you just need to be aware that they've got to be changed to published. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to access them. So I personally would never use draft, but I'm just aware that it's selecting draft as an option once I copy an item. Quite a lot of people have also been creating master versions of rubrics and then copying them for different, maybe for different other subjects to utilize, for example, or they want to implement some for certain assessments and then copy them for others. So they've been creating a master and then copying the rubric for various purposes. And as I said, the idea of copying them is pretty easy, just the drop down and copy. You can actually preview a rubric once you've created it by hitting the preview button, and it shows you what it's going to look like to students, at which point, because I haven't put any kind of descriptor information in there, students would be able to get that. You can print a copy out for yourself to PDF or to your local device. But what I want to point out on this dashboard at the moment is that there we've got these chain links next to some of these names, which means that it has been associated with an assessment task. If it's got that link next to it, what it means is that this rubric has been attached to an assessment task already, and we can't delete it until it's not linked. So this is probably a good time for me to actually look at some assessment tasks and how we link rubrics to those tasks and what that means. So if I jump into my assignment dashboard underneath assessment, there's nothing in here that actually tells me from just looking at the labels of these assessments whether or not a rubric has been attached. I've actually got to open them up to see whether or not they have one. So maybe if I jump into, this will do. I'm going to edit the assignment. And the rubric settings are located underneath evaluation and feedback. At the moment, it's telling me this one has no rubric, but it does have turn it in, turned on. Okay. Open that tab up and we have our rubric section, at which point I can add and create a rubric from scratch from here or add existing. Add existing is going to look at your rubric library and let you choose from there. So I'm going to do that. It'll find my list. And there's the qualitative one that I made a minute ago and the scored rubric that I made just before. You can preview them on the right-hand side if you need to. I'm going to attach this quantitative rubric that I chose to this task. And there it is. It's sitting there. If I open that up with the drop-down, it'll give me a preview of what that looks like. Obviously, these look a lot better when they've got descriptors in. But it's telling me that it's tallying a rubric out of 50. And that when I mark with this rubric, it will then convert to whatever the weighting is for this task. So creating and attaching a rubric is pretty easy. I think it'd be worth looking at how we actually mark with a rubric and what it looks like from that point of view. So I'm going to jump out of this and get into an actual subject site with students in it, with submissions, with live assessment. So let's do that.
Excuse me.
Yep.
As somebody who's still trying to get their rubrics in there.
Yep.
Two things. One is that I think I am going to need some help getting everything into the master site because mine are only in subject sites. So who do I contact about? Is that a normal DLT request?
Absolutely. If you log a show or request through DLT, they will be able to help you transferring content, including rubrics, etc., or assessment information from your session site back into the master site.
The other thing is, while you've been talking, I've been doing a rubric to practice it, and I missed how I'm supposed to save it. So it's in there, but it's not saved or something, I think you were saying.
So it auto saves. So it's there. The one thing you need to check, Donna, is the status of whether it's published or it's still coming up as draft in the top right-hand corner when you're looking at the rubric.
Okay. Okay.
That's the one. We want to make sure it's published so that you can find it when you want to connect it to an assessment.
At the moment, when I open it, it's in evaluation and feedback. It's just really little. So I just click on it.
Yep.
And when I do that, it just opens it within that evaluation and feedback frame.
Right. So that condensed view.
Yeah.
Yep. Do you want to give me a subject code? I'll have a look.
SOC 101.
Okay. And you're in the session site, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So you've been looking at it through an assignment view, I'm guessing.
Yes.
And
it's that first one.
Okay. So let's edit the assignment.
What are those numbers?
I'll get to the numbers. Hang on a sec.
Yeah. Sorry.
So you've opened it here and you've looked at it here, and it's giving you this condensed view, right?
Yeah.
So it's sort of giving you a preview. The fact that we can see it in here means that it has been published, which is good.
Good.
Now, there's a cross on the side which will actually remove the rubric from here. Otherwise, underneath, you can add multiple rubrics to a task. You don't have to just use the one if you, for whatever reason, you've got multiple rubrics attached. But when we actually click on Add Existing, if you'd made one through your rubric dashboard rather than through an assessment here, if you clicked on Add Existing, it has this preview option on the right-hand side. And that will allow you to look at the rubric in full in a separate tab. Right, so you can actually have a look at how the whole thing looks without, I guess, looking at it in that condensed view. So I'm guessing that this one here that says Untitled is the one that you were playing around with. And similarly, you can click on this preview option on the right-hand side to get a look at what it looks like at the moment.
Yeah, so I don't know what that one is. The one I just put in was the assessment item 1.
Oh, right, this one, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that preview option is not a bad one, I guess. Sorry, go ahead.
How do I get to where you are now again?
Right, underneath your condensed view of that rubric, like I'll just collapse this, hit the drop down. Okay, this add rubric area underneath, if you just click on Add Existing, it's going to show you that list of all of your rubrics that are published, and you can preview them on the right with this icon that's here.
Gotcha.
That's one way of kind of getting that view without actually having to add them or do anything else. You can just view them if you want to have a look. Yep.
Thank you.
That's okay.
Hey, Lachlan, can I ask a question about the quiz?
Yeah, I mean, is it to do with rubrics in quizzes? Is that what you mean?
No, just the little specific questions I need to ask. I can give you a subject code if you need it.
Okay, we might hold it for a little bit. Let me finish talking about rubrics and then I'll have a look at your...
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
That's no problem. All right, what I want to actually show you guys is some actual rubrics in action being used for marking. So I'm going to jump into some actual session sites and look at some assignments with submissions against them so we can see what the rubrics look like when we're marking with them. So I'm going to jump into my assessment area, into the assignment dashboard. I'm going to find some assignments that have some submissions in and some rubrics. So I've got one here. There's an assignment. It uses a quantitative rubric. I've just labeled them like this so I can find them easily. You don't have to do that. And I'll jump into some of the student submissions. Okay, so what we have here is the document that the students have submitted. In this case, it's a PDF of some sort. I can click on that actual document in my assignment view, and it's showing me from here a preview of the student work. Okay, in this case, it looks like a PDF of some PowerPoint slides. I could annotate that, etc. when I'm marking. My overall feedback, etc. is down here if I wanted to provide some text feedback on it. The task itself is worth 10%. Sitting above that, we have our rubric embedded, and it's telling me from the label, I've labeled it as a quantitative rubric with 4 criterion. When I click on that drop down, it gives me that condensed view or inline view of the rubric. It's telling me that the rubric's being scored out of 35. So at the end of this, it will convert that score out of 35 into the total value of the task, which we said was 10%. Now, if I hover my mouse over each of the scale areas, I've labeled them with those percentages and titles. And those initial starting scores you can see appearing. So if I chose distinction for the first criterion, it's starting with 4.2 as the base. However, I can click on that value and adjust that to whatever I want. So if I want that to go down, if I've started with 1 decimal place, it will in fact adjust those scores up and down. I can put in 4.7, I can put in 3 point whatever. you can put in as many decimal places as you like in the system, etc. But once you put in those values, it will change the score. However, keep in mind that this score doesn't acknowledge how we use what our marking brackets are of distinction, credit, fail, etc. So it doesn't care that a 3.75 maybe isn't a distinction. If it's in the upper level of a credit or whatever, it's just changing that score. So what that means is that if you're marking in line, maybe you need to be aware of where those differences are. You're adjusting up and down within that that kind of bracket. It doesn't stop you from going below or underneath what a distinction is. It doesn't know what they are. I can then put in. Sorry, go ahead.
No, just saying that's not good.
No, well, I mean, it means your markers need to be aware that, yes, it allows you to grade within a range, but the range is the entire bracket, right? So this is why your starting point is important when you're setting up those rubrics. I've been advising people to set the maximum value for each bracket and to tell their markers to adjust that score down for whatever they need to, but it doesn't stop you from putting in a value that falls outside of that range. So they're going to have to get used to that, I guess.
So Lachlan, we can't lock it?
No, it doesn't stop you from putting in other values, basically.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't able to score within a range in Turnitin at all. It only had one preset value. Brightspace allows you to grade within a range, but the range is the entire band, basically. All right, so you can also put in your comments for each criterion underneath when you're marking. But the idea is you've chosen your scores in each, tallies those scores progressively, and then gives you a total, 27.4 out of 35, and then it converts that into a value out of 10. So you can see it does that conversion for you. Notice that overall score down here. If you don't delete those other columns, this is what we're left with. And that's what I mean about it being confusing, leaving in that overall value bit in the rubric. Doesn't really do anything for the students. It has no bearing on the actual grade or the score. It's just this separate kind of thing. That's why I've been saying delete all those other areas and just call this not applicable. So that's our quantitative rubric in action. It tallies the scores, it converts them to the actual task weighting itself, and then your markers will be able to finish their marking by hitting Save Draft underneath. That, in a nutshell, is how marking with a quantitative rubric will look. If you have other markers coming in after the fact or moderators, etc., coming in and changing it, nothing will stop them from adjusting the rubric values. You can certainly do that. But that's how the tool works. If you want to view the rubric in full screen rather than a condensed view, you can click on the pop-out option at the top right here, which opens the rubric up in a full screen view. Again, they can click on those individual cells, and if they want to grade within a range, they click on the last cell and they can adjust it. So that's the difference between the condensed view of the rubric and the full screen view of the rubric.
Sorry, Lachlan, can I just ask, I forgot to write down where you went to do this in the site. Was it under evaluation?
So when you are looking at your assignment dashboard, there's a couple of ways to start the marking process. It's a really good question. Let's have a look. When you go into your assignment area and it opens up your assignments dashboard and you pick an individual assignment. So for example, I was looking at this third one. Clicking on the actual title of the assignment will open up your submission view, and it'll show you all of the students in the subject, and you can click on evaluation against each. If you change this to the submissions tab here, it will only show you students that have actually submitted something, at which point you can open those, and then it will allow you to see the rubric on the right-hand side.
Okay.
right? The other way that you can start the marking process, you'll notice here in this dashboard, it shows us these different categories at the top. Completed, which means students have submitted. Evaluated means draft marked or published, right? So it's gone back to students. The first column that says new submissions is actually interactive, which means you can click on those links and it will open up the student submission. So I think that's what I did the first time. So that will also jump straight to any new submissions from the students.
Mhm.
If we actually hit the drop down next to any of these titles of these assessments, you can even go straight to the submissions from here as well. So there's a few ways to get there.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
Lachlan,
I said,
yep. For either my master site or subject site in for next semester 60,
yep.
I hit on assessment and no assignments turn up at all.
Okay, do you want to give me a subject code?
BMS 142.
Okay, so you're in the session site for session 60.
I can do that. Session. Yep.
All right, and if I click on my assessment menu item and assignments to go into your assignment dashboard, at the moment there's none in here. Are you saying that there should be some in here?
Well, I presumed that they would have been transported over from the Interact sites, that there would have been something there.
So those will have been copied into your master site if there were some, but assignments, did you create any assignment shells in your master site? Do you know? We'll have a look.
Well, master site also doesn't have anything in it, so I don't know how to do a. Oh, hang on. There are two there.
All right, looking at the
Hang
master
on.
site for BMS 142.
Yeah, but scientific information posted, there's no such assignment for. Oh, that's one for. Oh, sorry, wrong subject.
Wrong subject. Okay.
Introduction, master site, introduction, and assessment, assignments. There's nothing there. Nope. And
Right.
I don't know how to do the rest.
Well, we might need to have a look at that one. Basically, yeah, you've got to create the assignment shells. They don't transfer text-based assignments from Interact 2. They only transfer the quiz content and quizzes as well as your learning materials. Actual assignments have got to be created in the site themselves, either by the convener or you can log a Cheryl request and they'll get DLT staff to help with that.
So in another subject I do, so there are some assignments, perhaps somebody else has done that.
I'd say so. Someone's definitely created those, yeah.
In a shell. All right, okay.
So we
Hi,
create...
Lachlan.
Yeah, I'm ready to look at those
my
quizzes.
site very quickly.
Yep.
BMS 172.
Okay, so the session site or the master site?
Master site maybe for now.
Okay. What am I looking at?
To the assessment quiz.
To the quiz items, yeah.
Yep. And if you can click one of those back one.
Okay, you want me to have a look at the quiz itself?
Yeah, just click have a look first. I'll see the difference between the accessible and you can see if you go to the bottom. You have as choose 10 MCQs out of 56.
From a pool of 56, yep.
Yeah, which is all good. Could you back to the assessment again, back to previous one here to go down the very bottom.
Yep.
Keep going until see practice one and click hit one.
This one, yep.
Yeah, either one should work. If you go to the very bottom again, you can see rather than choose 10 out of all these many of a question pool.
Yeah.
How can I turn this one into choose only 10 out of these how many whatever question is in the pool?
Okay, so you need to create a question pool first and then put
Which-
these questions into the pool.
Who's already have it already somewhere?
It's going to be, looks like it's going to be stored somewhere. It looks like it's coming from the question library.
Yeah, we already have the pool of the heap region.
Okay.
They display the whole thing there instead of choose 10 out of
Yeah, you've got to create
number.
you've got to create a pool first rather than just adding questions. So
the pool's already there. Actually, if you go to the one you see the previous one, like accessible, which have
yeah, that has a pool in place, but this one
yes,
doesn't.
already. So I just want to for the practice one, access the same pool of the questions.
Yeah, so you probably need to you've still got to create a new pool, or you copy the same quiz, the other one, and use the same settings. This at the moment, this one in here doesn't have a pool in place, so you would either need to create a new pool and choose which questions to include, or you can duplicate.
Yeah, I'm thinking of duplicate be better if you go
use the duplicate as a practice. Yeah, absolutely.
So if you go to the top, which have A, at the ending with A, that's all accessible, which does have a pool already in it.
Yep. If you choose one of those, you can then copy it. So and rename it. Yeah, use the same one.
You want to make one for me now? I can.
Okay. Which one do you want me to copy?
The back one.
Back one?
Just one of them have to, yeah.
All right. If I copy this.
Yep.
At this point, it's going to ask me to change the name. Right.
Yep.
So you were talking about something about
just change A into P. P means practice to the end.
Yep.
Thank you.
At that point, it's not going to go into the grade book, right? You'll notice that it's still using 10 out of 56.
Beautiful. That's what I want. Yeah.
Save and close. Yeah. So just duplicate it and change the name for whatever purpose. So it will have added it down the bottom.
Oh, beautiful. How good is that? Thank you so much, Lucky.
Okay.
And another thing is when I'm reading these training materials, we usually need to duplicate our quiz items. What does that mean?
Copy just what we just did a minute ago.
But this one just for one's for the accessible, one's for practice.
Yeah.
When they are reading through the training document, says we should duplicate even the accessible. For example, back 1-A, we should duplicate that one as well.
For what?
Might misunderstanding.
Oh, okay. Now I'm with you. All right. For different cohorts. So when you have a subject with multiple cohorts of students, you need to have a separate assessment item, whether it's a quiz or assignment for every cohort.
Oh, right. Okay.
Right. Now, at which point you would be duplicating, making a copy and changing the name so that it includes the cohort that it's intended for, right? So you would be making one for back one for Bathurst internal, one for back one for Bathurst distance.
Makes sense.
That's what they mean, duplicating them.
So why we didn't duplicate if they can do if they're doing the same thing?
Because they're each going to have their own separate column in the grade book, Sean.
Oh, okay.
That's the reason. And ultimately we have to join the assessments to their individual gradebook columns.
Okay.
Right. So you need to have a version of these available for each cohort that's going to be available.
Thank you. And if I have one more question, all right, one more quickly.
All right, I'll give you one more quick one.
Thank you. Now, in the old days, I mean, in the Interactive 2, where we can merge all the cohort into one big the greater center, are we able to do this one in the Brightspace?
So they're all merged within one single subject site, but they all have their own individual columns in the grade book. Every cohort, every assessment task will have their own columns in the grade book. Once the subject outline is published next week, for example, have I got that right? So they went live on the 24th. So next week, the subject outlines are going to be published. And at that point, you're going to see all of those columns in the grade book for each of those cohorts and their assessment tasks.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Lucky. Or leave your time for other people.
No problem at all. Sophia.
Yes, I've got a question about the rubric as well. And in 325. I don't know if I can share my screen. Do you allow that?
Or I can jump into it if you like.
All right.
What was the code? BMS?
No. NRS 325.
Thank you very much. In the session site, yeah?
Yeah, subject site, yeah, or session site, okay, yeah. And if we could go to assessments and assignments there, and then the first one, assessment one, and I want to create a rubric for that one.
Okay. So underneath evaluation and feedback, you would add a rubric here.
Yeah.
All right, you can do that, or you can start in your rubric dashboard and create the rubric, either one. I actually find it a little bit easier to create my rubric first without all of the assessment stuff on the left, which is why I started this today by going into subject admin, and the rubric section is here. You get this is where you can make all of your rubrics in advance underneath assessment. You've got a few here already.
Yeah, like assessment one, for example.
Yeah, is that the one you've been working on?
Yeah. And
Would you like
just that in some areas it's not allowing me to click, and I'm like, I don't know what's happening there. Yeah, assessment one.
Can you see how you've got the word draft here next to it as well? If it is draft, it means that you're not going to be able to connect it to an assignment. So we have to change that to publish. That's okay. I'll show you how to do that. If I open up assessment one, up here in the corner where it says status draft, you can change that just to published. It doesn't matter if it's published. It's not visible to students until you attach it to an assignment. So I would just be changing this to draft so that you can at least find it when you're ready to connect it to an assignment.
So where is that coming from now? I see there's information like it describes a typical 3-year-old. Is that from the subject outline or?
No, someone has created this rubric.
Oh.
I'm not sure who's created it, but someone's definitely created it.
That's what I'm actually about to create, and I'm seeing that now. Oh, who did that?
I have no idea. They definitely don't exist in the site themselves, so it's been created at some point. You don't have to use it. You're welcome to create a new one. But there's
maybe it's because I had a question, and Jackie was assisting me, but we didn't really go into creating unless she has initiated the creation of a rubric for me.
Potentially, yep.
Jackie from DLT.
Yep, that sounds like Jackie. She probably create rubrics. Yep.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, have a look at it, but maybe it's a value. I'm not sure if the criterion are accurate. It doesn't actually have numbers against each of them as well, which I would never advise. It's always good to have a starting point with the criterion number, so it's easier to refer
like
the students to them.
Criterion one.
Yeah. Yeah. Start with a basic label so you can at least point the students to, it's otherwise you've got to describe the whole criterion here. So yeah, anyway.
Okay, so it's best just to say criterion one instead of writing the whole thing.
Look, I would start with at least having criterion one and at least a succinct or brief description. Right? This is not too bad, to be honest. I've seen some that go for a lot longer and they end up having to actually paraphrase the text because there's just too much information. This is a bit better.
Yeah, I think Jackie must have done that.
Potentially.
Oh, that's interesting. That's good.
I think they've copied and pasted it over the top of criterion 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So either use it, edit it, you can copy it, you can delete it. It's up to you. But
no, that's fine. Thank you so much. Yeah, because that's what I wanted to ask, because I was clicking the 30 there, the total amount, total marks there on the right side, the column there. I was trying to click 30 there and it wasn't clicking. I think maybe there's an activity that I had not done because it was not active. It was not responding. And
if you ever have that problem with a rubric where it's not letting you modify the rubric because it's been linked, for example, to something else, then your best bet is in fact just to copy it and make a new one. Basically, you just change the name slightly, But I think I think a lot of staff are going to have that issue because once a rubric is connected to an assessment task, it'll show you that it's linked. You can adjust it. Once students start making submissions, it will lock the rubric and you won't be able to modify it. So that's the difference between whether or not it will let you make changes. But you can always duplicate a rubric from your rubrics dashboard inside subject admin. Right. So, and then, you get the same rubric, you make your changes to it, but you need to be aware of what happens to a rubric once a student starts submitting an assignment that has a rubric attached to it. And if I show you, I'm going to have to finish things up in a second because I've got a training session to run at 1 o'clock. If I look at, let me open my rubrics dashboard in this area. See these padlocks? Right? That means that students have submitted into assignments that are connected to this rubric.
And it's locked.
Right? And it's locked. Here's another one. And there's the link which says, this means that the rubric has been put into an assignment, but no submissions have been made yet. This means that it's been connected to an assignment and submissions are made. So the difference is I can modify this one. I can't do anything to this one. I actually have to duplicate it, copy it, and then work on the copy rather than that.
All right. So at the bottom, as I was doing that, it was giving me two options, either cancel or attach rubric. So we attach it even during its development. Can we attach it?
Yeah, you can attach it. You can work on it. That's fine.
Right.
You can edit it and modify it until students start making submissions. Once they start making submissions, the only thing you can do to it is delete it.
All right. All right. Oh, no, that's fine, because I was saying, how can it say attach when I'm not yet finished? So I canceled it initially and it disappeared. So I said, okay, so probably I need to attach it.
Yeah, look, I would attach it and keep working on it. It saves you an up-to-date version of it.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
No problem. Thanks. I know today's session has gone a little bit all over the shop. We were sort of talking about rubrics a bit and looked at different instances in subject sites, etc., and masters, but we encourage you to join us at any of the drop-ins on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday with any questions you have at all. And perhaps I'll see you at some of those throughout the week. Thanks, folks. We'll see you soon.